There was one other thing that we ran across in the process of talking before this, and that was some of the interactions you've had with some of the other parts of the truth movement that get, I think, a little carried away. And I mean, can you open up on that a little bit? I don't want, I'll let you determine how much you want to do that, but I think it's important that people recognize, or let me just say, when you go around making things like, oh, nobody died, or if you say there were no planes, or things like that, you're talking about, you know, something that's rather personal on your side of the story. So can you explain your interaction with that?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll do this is a good opportunity to do a very brief I guess journey of stuff. So I I guess started to look at what we were being told with more of a critical eye at the end of October 2001, probably November 2001. And that was primarily driven by my co-director, who'd forwarded me an article by John Pilger, which was called "This War is a Farce," and that really shocked me. I was still obviously dealing with the shock and grief and stuff, but I hadn't really thought much about what we were being told. I mean, I was briefly very angry, probably early October, you know, kind of not willing on the war, but I was just, you know, I was just pissed off, and I wanted someone to pay for, you know, what they'd done. But I read this article, and it just started me to think about what is going on here, in terms of, you know, the country that they were bombing and who they're supposed to be harboring, and the military buildup that had almost been going on prior to September the 11th. And anyway, so I read an awful lot of John Pilger books after that. And this might make some people kind of laugh. I also started reading Noam Chomsky stuff. I think he had one of the first published books called 9/11, cleverly, as a title. And I hadn't really considered, you know, what governments and powerful players get up to. Let's just leave it at that. And so I started to read an awful lot. There were authors in the UK, a chap called Nafeez Ahmed, probably around the 2004 period. Started reading his books. And I was more interested in, I guess, the paper trail kind of stuff, rather than what we're actually, you know, mainly talking about now. So I basically started started delving into all the stuff with Al Qaeda. There's lots of great books that have been written about stuff, and I hadn't really considered, I guess, but Building 7, it might sound weird, never really interested me. I was aware of certainly Building 7 in 2007, 2008. 2008 was the year the reports came out, I believe. And at that point, you know, I accepted that Building 7 had been brought down. It took me a couple of years more to seriously consider that for the towers. And so it wasn't something that really drew my attention, I guess, to the 9/11 truth movement, whatever you want to call it. And in between this time, sorry, I should say, I disappeared to Thailand for 6 years. And, you know, I really was in a different world and not really paying that much attention, I guess, to what was happening between 2005, 2007 with all the, you know, the big 9/11 truth movement stuff going on. But anyway, so come back to David's question. I hadn't gone public. And so the first time I went public was September 2013. And Ian Henshall, who's kind of loosely in charge of the heads up the Reinvestigate 9/11 group in the UK, had invited me to talk. I'd met him sort of 6 months earlier. And I think he'd sent an email out, you know, basically saying, you know, the press release or something saying I'd be talking. And he had his contact details as he normally does. And I just, I think, opted for an email address, you know, and I'd say almost immediately I just got inundated with everyone's pet theory, you know, which, you yeah, I'm sure all of you guys would have heard of every single theory that's out there, but these were pretty direct email messages. So I had people directed energy stuff, basically saying that if I don't talk about them, I'm preventing the world from having free energy and all that kind of stuff, and I'm a shill, blah blah blah. But the worst one, I think, which David alluded to, comes from September Clues, which some of you probably are familiar with, maybe not. They're obviously
it's a video.
Yeah, best known for their video, and it's essentially no planes. And what they actually targeted me about was not actually that. It was the fact that my brother didn't die. In fact, no one died. It's all CGI. And then obviously when I sort of protested this, both in an email exchange, but also briefly on a forum called Let's Roll forum. Let's Roll, I think it's called.
Yeah.
They then started saying, "How well did you know your brother? Does he work is it possible he may have worked for MI6 and stuff like that?" And it was just, it was so ridiculous. But then I started to look at, their forum and also Let's Roll forum, and this is actually how I came across them anyway. First of all, I hadn't obviously until they emailed me, I hadn't had an interaction with them. But I remember stumbling across Let's Roll forums because I'm guessing, because I found out that my brother's ex-fiance did the same, regularly put my brother's name in a 911 in the search bar. And, certainly back in the day when I was doing this, I'd come across a lot of stuff. There's a lot of, sites where memorial sites and people are given, memories of Geoff and stuff, nice stuff like that, yeah. But also you'd stumble across these sites. And the reason being is they'd done meticulous research on family stuff. So everything about that individual, and obviously their names repeatedly coming up, the day they died, family members, etc. So when you put a search in of, Geoff Campbell 9/11, I would find these sort of sites. And then you go on there, and they're basically saying that they're questioning the official narrative and the government's lying, which most of us probably here would agree that to a certain degree that's definitely going on. So, but if you're there as a family member and this is your first interaction with people who are questioning the official narrative, for me it's quite simple why these kind of sites have been set up. If they are truly disinfo and not just delusional people, it's to attract family members in, because we've got the power to go through the courts and all the rest of it. It's to just switch us off, going, you lot are absolutely mad. And I saw quite heartbreaking, forum posts by family members, obviously appalled at what they're finding, sort of saying, I can't believe you're talking rubbish. My uncle died on 9/11, blah blah blah. And then they start posting pictures of them, and then they started interacting with this one girl. She's like probably late teens, and it was like, prove that your loved one died. And then there's a heartbreaking clip of her showing all the photos that are obviously in a front room somewhere, obviously upset, going, this is him, this is our wedding, this is whatever. And for me, trying to look at it and analyze why would these sites exist if it's not delusional people, and it is actually truly disinfo. It's there, I think, in part to get family members to just go, you're a bunch of nutty conspiracy theorists talking rubbish.
Turn family members off to the truth movement.
Yes. And then, if you haven't already had that drilled into you by the media, if you actually come across those sort of sites, it's the first thing you're obviously going to go, they're nuts. Yeah.
And didn't you actually have someone ask you, prove your brother even existed?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the email was, basically, that. And I actually challenged, I won't mention his name, but, the main guy behind it, and said, right, anytime.
I won't mention it, but I wouldn't actually hesitate to. But
just like, anytime, stick $1,000 down, £1,000. If you're so confident, and I'll just any court, anywhere you want to go and do this, we'll go and do it, and of course they just backtrack quickly, but it was more. I was kind of shocked that those sort of sites exist, and they still do. I mean, I shouldn't give them any airtime, but there's another site called Fakeologist. And part of me, we're all familiar with, the term false flag and stuff like that. But what really alarmed me, and I'd say in particular over the last definitely sort of 10 years, is this idea hoax is just applied so easily now by a lot of people who, supposedly are questioning official narratives, but they just say hoax. And I do believe a lot of this has come out of the deliberate disinfo campaigns that were run around 9/11. This idea that everyone's, it's so ludicrous. I've had people sort of saying, every single time we meet up for the anniversary, there's some sort of a memorial thing in London with the family members, that we're all actors. We're paid to do this. It's like, it's so crazy. I don't know if it's delusional, whether it is disinfo. It's kind of just, it's nuts,
Yeah.
So anyway, that was just.
I was just interested that you'd had such a personal encounter with that phenomena. I'm aware of that phenomena from this side, but it was interesting to hear the effect of that kind of talk, when somebody who has a personal investment in this. I think
David, they do things like, they'll analyze family photos. So, I mean, obviously in our case, I can just say what they are. So Geoff and his fiance, and they've got things sort of saying, oh, there's a dodgy shadow. It's obviously, photoshopped in, and they do that for every single victim. They've almost got, here's the victim. We're going to investigate where they worked, all their family connections, what they found on the internet, and they post it there. And it's so bizarre. So almost every single victim has basically been pulled apart and been accused of lying because no one died. It's all CGI.
Yeah. Okay, I think it's time we need to open this up to some questions. Yeah. And we've covered a lot of different threads, and I just wanted to get a lot of this stuff on the table, okay? So here,
sure.
let's see. Marty, do you have some questions that we can go with?
Yes, I wanted to start. Actually, I have one just to start with, Matt, which is just a follow on to your experience of going public, which is, you talked about your personal experience. What about other family members? And are they aligned with you on this? And my experience of families, there's some really strong disagreements in families. And if you could speak a little bit to that experience with your family.
Yeah, I mean, my own family, I mean, I've always, myself and Mum are kind of similar. So we are the only ones in the family. So it's my dad and my brother Rob, sort of 5 years younger. It's only been my mum and myself who have viewed Jeff's remains. My dad and Rob have never wanted to remember Geoff in that way or see him in that way. And so whilst they're both signatories to the inquest, they haven't certainly done as much research or spent as much time as I have. My mum's watched an awful lot of videos and stuff. My dad's a retired architect, and he's always said when he actually looked at it that Building 7's just nuts. It's impossible. But he's not really gone much further than that. But yeah, I mean, I guess we're kind of lucky that way, that there isn't a big division in the family. My extended family, I don't know, obviously talk about it, but they don't seem that interested or persuaded, perhaps, just the way people are. And then other family members, it's tricky to broach this topic, because I only tend to see these people around the anniversary time. Whilst some people in the UK, because there was sort of 67 victims, about 40 kept in contact. We had like a UK support group, which was great in the early days, but because we sort of waltzed off to Thailand for 6 years, I didn't really forge those kind of friendships that my mum had with a lot of people in that group. So of the few people that I have spoken to some they absolutely know that something, isn't right. One guy, he had a lengthy conversation, I think, with a retired firefighter at World Trade, and he's of the opinion that they were brought down, but they're not really willing or even able to do anything. I mean, a lot of the people, I'm sure it's the same in the States. Parents of the people who died are getting old, and a lot of them have passed anyway. And these particular couple, they're not in great health, and great that it would be to go and get their support. It's not really going to be forthcoming. There's another guy who supports what I'm doing, but won't go public about it. I met 2 children of a father who died. They were probably, I don't know, 10, mid-teens when it happened. They're obviously older now. And again, it's hard to get them to go public, and there's huge divisions in their family actually, which will probably make it almost impossible for them to come forward. I mean, it isn't easy. I mean, I apart from boring people to death in bars, both in the UK and in Thailand, talking about 9/11, I never went public until 2013. It's not an easy thing to do. I mean, grief's private. It's not something you talk about, and if it wasn't, I think, if it wasn't for the legal stuff, and I've always had this idea of trying to get some justice for my brother, I probably wouldn't be speaking about it. I wouldn't just be talking about it if there was no goal, if you know what I mean. So, I mean, that's my experience with British families. It's very hard. I mean, I'm hoping that, if we at least get it into a coroner's court, that, other family members may come forward. I mean, again, I'm not going to name names. One British family was looking at potentially signing a letter of support, but we're just worried about it going public and stuff, and that's not happening. But I'm hoping that if we do actually get it into a coroner's court, that other family members will join me in supporting what we're trying to do. And obviously, God, if it does happen, we actually change the verdict. I'd expect that to be a massive wake-up call for all family members around the world, let alone just the UK.
Okay. Marty, do you have someone else on the line there?
Yes. So let's see. We have first Chad Brown, and then followed by Michael Hoy, and then Dorothy Loring. So Chad.
Okay. Yeah, I followed this closely and was in New York at the time and read a lot about it. But I think the merits of your particular case are, not of interest to me. I mean, they're of interest, but I think that the opposition here is what I'd like to focus on. After 20 years and many attempts, I think it's pretty clear that we're up against, a deep state actor who is at a higher level than even the US and UK governments, and that they've got tremendous ability to influence things. So I don't see any reason for optimism that any legal case in either the US or UK or any place else is going to get very far. The people on the other side, or the powers that shouldn't be, as the saying goes, are simply going to prevent the normal course of justice. I mean, look at April Gallup in the US case, and there are cases proceeding in New York. I'm sure there are many more than even I'm aware of. But to bring it to a question, what, if any, basis do you have to believe that this case would ever go forward? I mean, saying that, well, the merits are overwhelming, I don't think matters to my perspective. If the merits of a case mattered, this thing would have gone much further, much sooner.
Let's get Matt's response
Yeah,
to
so
that.
I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and certainly it probably does reflect my views to a certain extent. You know, it's not an easy game, and yes, it's deep state, all the rest of it. It's not easy. In terms of the merit, it's obviously some of it's obviously in law is precedent, and so you know some of the arguments that are put forward are going to be to cite cases that are similar that were successful. So one of the things that we looked at early on was essentially going through the various cases where inquests had tried to be reopened to see where there are similarities and where you know we would be strong because we're similar to successful cases. And you know there have been, you know, yes, this is on a very big scale, I guess, compared to you know perhaps someone dying in a jail cell, but you know there are cases that you know we certainly are putting forward similar arguments. So at the moment, I mean, you know, we could just throw in the towel, not bother, but on paper we should be able to get this into a court. I don't know what's going to happen if we are actually able to get it into a coroner's court, and maybe you know the deep state may want to kill it off properly there. Yeah, I'm sure obviously it would be easier to kill it off at this phase before it goes into from the Attorney General to the High Court. But you know, we've got to give it a go. The other thing that I find kind of interesting is the fact that actually, if another British victim were to get their loved one identified and remains were repatriated, that would by law trigger an inquest. And I don't know, and obviously that if could present an opportunity to obviously try and get hold of and make contact with the family. I mean, I follow, not that actually a lot has happened with the identification efforts at the OCME at the moment in New York because of COVID and stuff. But you know, I've been following their progress closely in terms of you know how many new remains get identified, how many new people actually get identified. So I'm still holding out hope that even if we're not successful, that actually another British victim may be identified, because they haven't given up. They're still going through. There's still 7,000 plus remains that are unidentified.
Yeah, you never can tell when you're going to come up against a non-corrupt judge, you know?
Absolutely. Like I said, you know, I talked about Bloody Sunday. I mean, that, okay, was definitely politically the right time, but, you know, the people that were involved in that cover were still alive, you know, including the ex-Prime Minister, Ted Heath. So, yeah, I've got to remain hopeful and optimistic. Otherwise, what's the point of all this?
Right. I mean, Chad's question applies to all of us. I mean, like, why am I still doing this after all this time? Well, what am I going to do? You know, I'm doing what I can do, and whether or not it's successful, I feel like it's my calling to keep hammering away at what I can contribute, and that applies to all of us, I think. Okay, I mean, that's my response as well. Marty, do you have another one?
Yes. So next is Michael Hoy, and then Dorothy Loring.
Okay.
Good morning. Yeah, I think it's great that you are doing this, and I am a little confused on 2 points, one of which I think you clarified a little bit with Marty's question. I was trying to get in my head a clear understanding of who the families involved in the lawsuit are. At first, I thought maybe it was all 10 families, and now it sounds like it's basically you and your mother. And I'm just wondering what kind of support you have from the others. And the other part I was confused about is the courts and the levels of courts. It sounds like the next step is a coroner's court. Do I have that right? And then you mentioned something about a high court, and I don't know if they're the same court or a different court or what the process is. So I was kind of curious about the sequence of potential legal cases in courts.
Thanks for that question. Yeah, so just to clarify, on the actual petition that's being submitted, my whole family are signing it. So my mum, my dad, Rob, and myself, but also Geoff's ex-fiance, who's a New Yorker. She's signing it too. The actual the courts in the UK are kind of a coroner's court. It's quite powerful, but it kind of sits in its own little world. It's a very specialized area of law. So you tend to engage barristers, lawyers who have speciality in that area. So although it's quite narrow in scope, it's a kind of a tricky area of law that is navigated in a slightly different way, I guess, to our regular system. So in the UK, we have magistrates' courts, we have a high court, and then above the High Court, we have the Supreme Court. When you're doing the process we are doing with the Attorney General, so we're petitioning the Attorney General, she only, if she grants her authority, she just pushes it up to the High Court. A decision will be made at the High Court to then appoint it to a coroner's court. And it will be, again, if they do, the West London coroner's court. So it kind of sits sideways to the High Court. It's in its own little world, a coroner's court. And yes, they deal with wrongful deaths and murders and stuff. But in terms of the number of petitions that the Attorney General has to deal with each year from people requesting a fresh inquest, I wouldn't say it's a handful, but we're not talking, 10s, 20, 30 applications. So we're not going to be waiting at the back of a huge backlog of requests to the Attorney General. But yeah, it's a kind of weird laddered system. I hope that's answering the question as best I can with my knowledge of how it works over here.
Okay. Marty?
Dorothy is next, and then I'm going to ask a question for Don Plummer. So Dorothy.
All right.
Hello.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for being with us today, and my condolences for your loss. So I've got two related questions. The first is, have you received any messages sort of from official channels trying to discourage you from pursuing this? And then the other is, what kind of reception are you getting from local and national media?
Okay. No, I mean, I was so busy between sort of 2014, 2016. I gave a list of all the mad stuff that I got up to David when we were talking about what would we perhaps discuss. So, I emailed the police, fire brigade, scientists, all MPs, all 600 and whatever it was, 50 of them in the UK, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the Home Office, Prime Minister, President of the US, embassies, ambassadors, everyone I could think of. And what I normally found was, mainly it just fell on silent, tumbleweeds. No one actually bothered replying. If they did, they just, rolled out the "We stand by the 9/11 Commission report," bipartisan, blah, blah, blah. The only time it probably got a little bit weird was when I was speaking with the Metropolitan Police, who, as is often the case, I think, when someone is murdered, you get appointed or assigned a police liaison officer. So it's like you're dealing with the police, but it's one level removed from, I guess, the investigation or stuff that's going on. And so I'd been in contact with these two ladies for, best part of, I don't know, 10, 15, or 10, whatever, 12 years. Really just about things like dealing with remains when they came and stuff like that. And then I just started to put together an awful lot of questions that I wanted answers from, whether it be from the UK authorities or the US authorities. Obviously, she couldn't answer the US questions, but it got to the point where it was certainly, way over her head, the type of questions I was asking. And I was particularly interested in the report that the counterterrorism group, let's say called SA15, had prepared in the UK for my brother's inquest, because I'd been in contact with the police officer, managed to get hold of his contact details, who actually read out the report at the inquest. And for whatever reason, the report was exempt from disclosure, so I couldn't see it. And anyway, so lots of questions weren't being answered, and because they put me, the police officer said, contact your local MP. Some stuff can be raised in Parliament. Contact the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Maybe they could do something. Contact the US authorities. So contact the American ambassador in the UK, and stuff like that. And so anyway, the police officer couldn't really help with a lot of the questions I had, and so she offered a meeting with someone from counterintelligence. And so probably, I don't know, I get mixed up with dates, but sort of February 2014 sort of time frame, I had a meeting with a police officer and a chap from counterterrorism to discuss my concerns with the official narrative. And I mean, without going into too much detail, I mean, the guy, because it was kind of, I wouldn't say a bit naughty of us, but Tony Rook was with me, who made Incontrovertible, because we were still filming at that time. Not that we filmed this meeting. And then we also had an ex-counterterrorism police officer from Gatwick Airport in attendance. And so the two people that came down weren't prepared for this. And, it was a bit naughty, but we kind of hit them with so many questions. They hadn't heard of any of the stuff we were talking about, and particularly things like Building 7 and stuff like that. And anyway, the main thing that kind of shocked me in that meeting was the fact that the guy who I sat opposite with from counterterrorism was actually the one that wrote the report. And it was just kind of astonishing how little he knew with the stuff that we were asking him questions about. And so that was, I guess, and then shortly after that, they kind of stopped answering my questions. This is the police. And I think about a year later, they basically said, I think it wasn't just me, but they essentially said they're withdrawing the police liaison role, which I guess partly the amount of time that had passed, and I guess they're not really expecting any more remains to be identified. But anyway, so I don't have a line of contact anymore with the Met, which was obviously useful at the time. But I've not really had any sort of real negative pushback saying don't go there. Although some of my friends think differently. They will think people are out to try and kill me or something. But anyway, never mind.
Marty, is there someone else?
So Don Plummer, Matt, he's wondering, have any body parts been found impregnated with some form of explosive? And he's not talking necessarily about Geoff or just about Geoff, but any others victims that you're aware of.
So yeah, I mean, definitely not with Geoff's remains. I'm not aware of anyone else's remains. I did actually pose the question, probably my second meeting with someone from the OCME in probably May 2014. Had they ever tested for explosives? I had to couch the question really carefully because I didn't want to come across as a, conspiracy theorist. Because they're still, I'm still dealing with them today. I still get stats off them and all the rest of it. But I basically just posed the question: had anyone ever considered, explosive testing for explosives on, residues, whatever, on the remains? And obviously they hadn't, and they hadn't really considered that. but I got the impression, certainly with the bones, I mean, they're cleaned so not well, but whatever the process is where they're extracting stuff, I don't think there'd be anything left anyway to test. But to answer your question, no, I don't know of any family, remains through family members who have had explosive materials. And sorry, was there a second part to that question, Marty?
Nope, there was not a second part.
Okay, is there another question?
Yes, so Dave Schlesinger, and then Fran, and then Rick Whittaker.
Hi, Dave.
Okay. I want to thank you for all your efforts. And I'm not optimistic because I'm concerned about the deep state, but it's still important to do this to prove whatever we can in case the deep state is not doing what they normally do. I learned that there's something called a remembrancer who sits behind the person who runs Parliament, so that the deep state of UK can have special access to all the information they need to cause corruption. I mainly wanted to, you noted Noam Chomsky. Many people here know that I was radicalized by Noam Chomsky and others during the Vietnam War. I took his political course twice and audited it twice. I met with him several times. And I realize I've mainly been a 9/11 truth activist because I'm so upset with Noam for being wrong about 9/11. So many anti-imperialist people refuse to even discuss the evidence, which is so hypocritical. He will, so he's not a hypocrite in that way. But and he does admit that he doesn't think the feds can prove that bin Laden was involved. But I just wanted you to comment further about your readings of Chomsky.
Yeah, so I mean, I just remember it was a small little book. I mean, I've got it somewhere, and it was just more. It opened stuff. So the Pilger was the main one, and I said I just started to read all of his various books and watched a lot of his documentaries. If you're not familiar with John Pilger, he's done a lot of great work. And Chomsky, I just started, reading around. Manufacturing Consent is a book I remember reading. Although everyone thought it was a bit odd. Because at the time I was working in the city on trading floors, and there's me sort of walking with this big book. It's kind of an odd thing to be reading. But yeah, I mean, I think I probably read 2, maybe 3 of his books, and then just small articles here and then I came across. It was really just opening my mind to the machinations of intelligence agencies. Obviously, we've got our own historical empire and dodgy stuff that we've done, but it really was an eye opener for me just to kind of read about all the things that that goes on that we're kindly, mainly oblivious to. And I said particularly John Pilger. Stuff in Australia, stuff in Indonesia, and other stuff that he's written about. I didn't know about it, and so it was a kind of a big eye opener for me to read about that stuff. But yeah, I mean, the thing with Chomsky isn't lost on me, because I know that it's that famous exchange about talking about Building 7. He just sort of rather drolly says publish papers or something. I can't remember what his response was. But he was, along with John Pilger, and also Michael Ruppert, I think, from the Wilderness. I had a lot of friends sending me stuff. So I remember the summer of 2002, I was reading his blog. I had friends as early as February 2002 saying you've got to go after Saudi Arabia, not just because the alleged hijackers were Saudi, but just because of all dodgy stuff that I guess was rumored then about their material support of the attacks and stuff.
Okay. Marty, anything else?
Yeah, we have a couple more, and then Fran.
Let's just do 2 more and then stop. All right.
Okay, so we've got the last 2. Then are Fran and Fran Shore and Rick Whittaker.
Okay, let's do Fran. Just a second, Fran. Okay.
Thanks, Matt. So I noticed from the notes you gave us that 2 of your allies Scott Forbes and Michael Meacher have both died. That seems like quite a loss to, help for you. Of course, do you expect there was any foul play in that? I assume not, but just let me know what you think.
Crikey. So let me just deal with Michael Meacher first. He, through, I think, Ian Henschel and Noel in the UK, managed to get me to have a meeting with Michael Meacher, who was a Labour MP at the time. And so we met in the buildings that were opposite House of Parliament. And the reason being is I think they'd spoken to him before. He obviously had written the foreword to one of David Ray Griffin's books, and was an outspoken critic of the official narrative. And I was hopeful that he would, even though he wasn't my local MP and he was supposed to be in the constituency, to get support of your MP, and I wasn't, but he was still willing to help me. And so we were using his private email address, not using his Parliament email address. And at that first meeting, it was, yes, he'd support me, do what was necessary. And then at this time, I've obviously been thinking about the inquest. And suddenly the thought occurred to me, is it possible to reopen my brother's inquest just purely off the back of the new remains? Because by law, my reading of it was, if you repatriate some remains, there has to be a brand new inquest because it's new evidence on its own. And anyway, so he spoke to a chap called Dominic Grieve, who was a Conservative MP, so the opposite side, in government at the time, but he was the ex-Attorney General. And so he obviously thought that would be a useful person to sound out, what are the chances and, how to go about it. And he was quite positive. I think he spoke to him a couple of times, Michael had to Dominic Grieve, and, said basically that we should push for a new inquest on the back of new evidence. And obviously some of that new evidence would be the remains that had been subsequently found after the inquest had been held. Because remember, the inquest was held in January 2013. Jeff's humerus was found in May 2013, so after the inquest. And so it was during a time when the Labour Party was in all sorts of upheaval, and Jeremy Corbyn had just been elected leader of the Labour Party. And I knew from, I guess, conversations with people who had been in the truth movement, say from 2005, 2006, that Jeremy Corbyn was helping Michael Meacher organise a showing of one of the probably popular, I'm guessing probably Loose Change, I don't know, films that were doing the rounds in 2006. And so I've always had this thing in the back of my mind that Jeremy Corbyn would have been, if he'd been Prime Minister, would have been a useful ally to have. So my last communication with Michael was in late September, and I had asked him to convene a meeting with himself and Jeremy. And I won't lie about it. It shocked me to the core when I got a text from someone about 4 weeks later that he died suddenly. I don't know, died suddenly of an illness. I mean, there was no autopsy as far as I can tell, and I don't think any foul play was suspected. But that did shock me somewhat, and obviously disappointing, because I was still looking to open the inquest, and it would have been great to have had a politician being able to bend the ear and at least have speak with someone who was an ex-Attorney General. Anyway, so that wasn't to be. And then, Scott Forbes, who I'm sure a lot of you perhaps are familiar with, he worked for Fiduciary Trust in Tower 2. And he was the guy who I don't know if it was a BBC interview or he's on record as basically talking about the kind of not unexpected, but it was very rare to do a total power down of. I mean, you only talk about the tower that he worked in, which was Building 2, but he was very categoric about from floor 50 upwards. There was a total power cut that weekend, and I mean, I know that my background is IT in the trading world, and he worked in IT. It's a big deal having a power down. You have to bring all the systems down, and then you bring them back up, and there's a real set procedure to make sure that both from the back end and the front end that the traders are looking at works after a power down. So it's a big deal. So he worked that weekend, the weekend immediately prior to September 11th. And so I met with him. I probably got in the notes. I wrote 2016. I can't remember, something like that. And I was very keen to get a sworn statement off him, knowing that at least I didn't know how we'd use it, but if I could get something from him stating that there was a total power down of his tower, it then back of the Attorney General's mind, it's like, oh yeah, maybe it is possible that explosives could have been placed during that weekend, or certainly the ones that were more likely to be discovered, assuming that perhaps others could be placed earlier. And then he said, yeah, I'll do that. And he also mentioned another chap, one of his colleagues who was still in contact with, who would also, testify and say the same thing. And a year later, I met him in London. He's a nice chap. I think he was still suffering from the impact of what he's, dealt with that day, but also, I guess, what he was talking about. And anyway, I chased him up the following year saying, can you prepare something? I remember at this point, I wasn't engaged with the barrister. I didn't really know the format, but it was just like I wanted to get something in writing, witnessed by, we've got people that I guess notary public or something, just something to make it official. And anyway, it never came about. And then the next thing I knew, someone posted something on Facebook probably, saying that Scott Forbes had died, and he died of cancer. And I don't know the circumstances. I don't, suspect foul play, but it both were setbacks to me in a selfish way personally, because of what I felt that they could help me with in terms of my brother's inquest.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's the two things. Two people sadly no longer with us.
Okay, the last one, Marty, is who?
Rick.
There you go.
Okay. Thanks, Matt, for your presentation, which must have been difficult. Whether or not a flying projectile of some sort hit WTC 1 and 2, the debate seems moot, since that does not explain the near freefall pulverizations of WTC 1, 2, and especially 7. At any rate, I've heard human remains were even found on roofs of surrounding buildings. How far away were the farthest remains of anyone found?
Just a second. Okay.
That's a good question. It's actually something that we've got to get a precise figure for. I do actually have a spreadsheet, which is a GPS log from, I think, probably David Cole obtained it under pre-information request, which has the coordinates, has the grid location. If the GPS data was taken, it's there as well. So, I mean, at a minimum, I could look at that and try and figure out which remains are the furthest away. But it is a good question, and it is something that we should have in the application, because I think it's important that the furthest distance is known to the Attorney General. So thanks for that. I shall be speaking to the barrister about that tomorrow. But what I do or can say and know about the remains that are on top of oh God, what was the
Deutsche Bank, I know.
Sorry, which one?
Deutsche Bank building?
Yeah, Deutsche Bank, yeah. So I was kind of shocked when I think I either read somewhere about the shoebox of remains that was collected from the top of that roof. Some, I don't know how many years, was it 5, 10 years on? It was some period of time later, and I, in an email exchange, I think I'd mentioned it when I met with them, but I ended up getting it in an email. I asked one of the people I'd met where the remains that were found on top of the roof, where did they come from? Which tower? That's what I was expecting as an answer. And she said to me that the majority of the remains that were found on that roof were from passengers. I don't think you distinguish whether it was crew or not, from AA11, which, to me is quite astonishing. If you look, you've got the two towers and you see where the Deutsche Bank building is, for the plane, when it went through Tower 1, even, coming out the backside or allowing for huge dust clouds, there's no direct line of sight through Tower 2 to hit the roof. And so you've got to do some fairly whizzy gas thermodynamic whatever analysis stuff to figure out how the hell, and it wasn't just remains. Apparently, I think it's in one of the reports, some life jacket remains were found on top of the roof as well. I mean, the mind boggles how they would have really got there with Tower 2 still standing. But I said, anyway, all I can report on is what the
other question on that is,
sorry, say again.
The other question there is coming back to the question about how does a body get fragmented that small. It really indicates high explosives, which does not seem to be what you get with a plane crash. So that's another, I mean, that's my questioning about it. I don't have any answers. So anyway.
Yeah, I think the distance thing, I said, we've got the scatter plot of the remains of where people had a location, but I said I do actually have the spreadsheet. So in theory, with a bit of whizzy spreadsheet stuff, I could figure out, take the outline of the buildings and where the remains are and figure out which one's the furthest remains. That's a good thing.
David,
yes?
Marty, I wanted to say a couple things. One is, could you open the chat for everyone? Because there are people who have, just some comments and things, so they could share those with everyone. And while you're doing that, one comment from Dave Schlesinger is that he wanted Matt to know, or all of you, that that David and Richard Gage delivered 100 peer-reviewed papers to Noam Chomsky's office, like directly. They went and delivered these papers, and that was in, he thinks, 2015 or 2016 to Chomsky's office. So David didn't say this, but it isn't like Chomsky didn't have the information, obviously.
Okay.
That's all I had.
So thank you, Matt. It's been an excellent conversation, and I don't know if any of Fran or Marty, if you have any final thoughts you want to throw into this.
Well, I'll just say one thing, Matt. It seems that you have gained some kind of personal peace around this for you to be able to talk about this like this. So I suspect you've done a lot of healing work, and I'm glad for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm in a good place.
It's always a little tricky doing analysis when it's personal, if I were a forensic person like on CSI or something, you're always dealing with human emotions at the visceral level. At the same time, you're trying to be objective and so forth. So it's a tricky tightrope to walk. Okay. So I think that pretty much does it for this session. And I want to thank Matt for agreeing to be with us, and hope to see more of you and have some more correspondence and so forth. So thank you.
Yep. Thanks for having me on.